The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Lincoln Middle School as Zoe Williams hurried through the hallway. She was 12 years old with bright brown eyes and hair styled in neat box braids that her mom had helped her do over the weekend. Zoe clutched her notebooks to her chest as she made her way to her locker before lunch period. "Hey, Zoe, wait up," called a voice from behind her. Zoe turned to see her friend Maya running to catch up with her. "Are you heading to lunch now?" Maya asked, slightly out of breath. "Yeah, I just need to drop off my books first," Zoe replied with a smile. She was glad to see Maya. Being one of only 7 black students in the entire 7th grade sometimes made Zoe feel like she stood out too much. Maya was always kind to her, which made school a bit easier. The two girls walked to the cafeteria together, talking about their science project that was due next week. The hallways were filled with the noise of slamming lockers and excited chatter, as students rushed to get food before the best options were gone. "I heard they have macaroni and cheese today," Maya said as they entered the cafeteria. The large room was already buzzing with activity. The smell of food filled the air, and the sound of trays clattering and kids laughing echoed off the walls. "That's my favorite," Zoe said, her stomach rumbling. She had been so busy finishing her math homework during study hall that she hadn't had time to eat her morning snack. The lunch line stretched across the cafeteria. Zoe and Maya joined the back of the line and waited as it slowly moved forward. Maya talked about a TV show she had watched the night before, but Zoe was distracted. She noticed Mrs. Gladys Porter watching her from behind the lunch counter. Mrs. Porter had worked at Lincoln Middle School for 15 years. She was a thin woman with graying hair always pulled back in a tight bun. Her small eyes seemed to narrow whenever Zoe came through her line. Zoe had mentioned this to her mom once, but her mom had said sometimes people just have naturally stern faces. "Maybe," Zoe had replied, "but her face gets extra stern for me." As the line moved forward, Zoe watched as Mrs. Porter served the students ahead of her. When Bobby Miller asked for extra cheese on his macaroni, Mrs. Porter smiled and gave him a heaping spoonful. When Lily Patel pointed out that her bread roll looked a bit burnt, Mrs. Porter quickly replaced it with a fresh one. "Next, Mrs. Porter," called, her voice sharp as Zoe stepped up to the counter. The lunch lady's smile disappeared and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Macaroni and cheese, please," Zoe said politely. Mrs. Porter scooped a portion onto Zoe's tray without a word. Zoe looked down at her food and frowned. The macaroni looked different from what she had seen on other students' trays. There were small green spots on the top, and the cheese sauce had a strange gray color in some places. "Excuse me, Mrs. Porter," Zoe said quietly. "I think something might be wrong with this macaroni. It has some green spots on it." Mrs. Porter barely glanced at the tray. "It's just how the cheese looks. Move along now," she said in a dismissive tone. "But it doesn't look like the macaroni you gave to other kids," Zoe persisted, her voice still polite but a little stronger. Mrs. Porter's face hardened. "There's nothing wrong with it. If you don't want it, you can choose something else or go to the back of the line." The students behind Zoe started to shift impatiently. Zoe felt her cheeks grow warm as people began to stare at her. "It's okay," Maya whispered from behind her. "You can share some of my lunch if you want." Zoe hesitated, then took her tray and moved along the line. She picked up an apple, a carton of milk, and a packet of crackers before following Maya to find seats. They sat at a table near the window, away from the noisy center of the cafeteria. Zoe placed her tray down and looked again at the macaroni and cheese. It definitely didn't look right. "Let me see," Maya said, leaning over to look at Zoe's food. Her eyes widened. "Zoe, that looks moldy. You can't eat that." Zoe poked at the macaroni with her fork. The green spots were clearly visible now that she looked more closely. Her appetite vanished as she realized Mrs. Porter had given her spoiled food. "I should tell someone," Zoe said, looking around the cafeteria. At that moment, a commotion at the lunch line caught their attention. Kelly Adams, a blonde girl from their math class, was talking to Mrs. Porter. "Mrs. Porter, I think there's something wrong with my macaroni. It has some discoloration," Kelly said, her voice carrying across the now quieter cafeteria. Mrs. Porter immediately took Kelly's tray. "Oh my, I'm so sorry about that, dear. Let me get you a fresh serving right away," Zoe's mouth fell open as she watched Mrs. Porter throw away Kelly's macaroni and carefully serve her a new portion from a different tray. Mrs. Porter even added extra cheese on top before handing it back to Kelly with a smile. "Did you see that?" Zoe whispered to Maya. "She just did exactly what I asked her to do for Kelly." Maya frowned, looking between Zoe's tray and Kelly's fresh serving. "That's not fair. You should tell someone." Zoe felt a mix of emotions rise in her chest: anger, hurt, and confusion. This wasn't the first time Mrs. Porter had treated her differently. There was the time Zoe had asked for an extra napkin, and Mrs. Porter had told her to take only what she needed, but then gave Ben Cooper a whole stack just minutes later. Or when Mrs. Porter had questioned if Zoe was eligible for the reduced lunch program, even though her name was clearly on the list. "I'm going to talk to Assistant Principal Rogers," Zoe decided, standing up with her tray. As Zoe walked across the cafeteria, she noticed other students looking at her. Some whispered to each other. She kept her head high, just like her mom had taught her. "You have every right to be treated with respect," her mom always said. Assistant Principal Diane Rogers was sitting at a table with some teachers when Zoe approached. Mrs. Rogers was a kind woman with curly red hair who always made time to listen to students. "Excuse me, Mrs. Rogers," Zoe said. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" Mrs. Rogers looked up from her conversation. "Of course, Zoe. What can I help you with?" Zoe placed her tray on the table. "Mrs. Porter gave me this macaroni and cheese. When I told her it looked spoiled, she said it was fine and told me to move along. But then she replaced Kelly's food right away when she complained about the same thing." Mrs. Rogers looked at the macaroni on Zoe's tray. Her eyebrows drew together as she spotted the green mold. "This is definitely spoiled," she said, pushing the tray away slightly. She looked up at Zoe with concern. "Did you eat any of it?" "No, ma'am," Zoe replied. "Good." Mrs. Rogers stood up. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Zoe. This is a serious food safety issue." She turned to one of the teachers at the table. "Mr. Carter, would you please take over in the cafeteria for a few minutes? I need to speak with Mrs. Porter and check on the food being served." Mr. Carter nodded and stood up. "Zoe, come with me," Mrs. Rogers said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're going to get you a proper lunch, and then we need to talk about what happened." As they walked toward her office, Zoe saw Mrs. Rogers glance back at the lunch line where Mrs. Porter was still serving students. For the first time since the incident began, Zoe felt that someone was taking her seriously. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that speaking up had been the right thing to do. In Mrs. Rogers' office, the assistant principal opened a small refrigerator and took out a sandwich, an orange, and a bottle of water. "It's not much, but it's fresh," she said, placing the food on her desk for Zoe. "Thank you," Zoe said, sitting down in the chair across from Mrs. Rogers. "Now," Mrs. Rogers said, taking out a notebook, "I want you to tell me everything that happened, and if this has ever happened before." Zoe took a deep breath and began to tell her story. Outside, the lunch period continued, but inside that office, something important had started, something that would change Lincoln Middle School in ways no one could yet imagine. Zoe sat in Assistant Principal Rogers' office, her hands folded in her lap. The small sandwich Mrs. Rogers had given her was already half eaten. It tasted much better than the moldy macaroni and cheese would have. "So this isn't the first time Mrs. Porter has treated you differently?" Mrs. Rogers asked, her pen moving across her notepad. "No, ma'am," Zoe replied. "It's been happening all year. She gives me smaller portions than other kids. Sometimes she tells me there's no more of something, even when I can see there is." Mrs. Rogers frowned and wrote something down. "Has she done this to other students too?" Zoe thought for a moment. "I've seen her do similar things to Jamal and Deshaun, and sometimes to Maria and the other Hispanic students." She paused. "It's mostly students who look like me." Mrs. Rogers put down her pen and looked Zoe directly in the eyes. "Zoe, what you're describing is very serious. It sounds like Mrs. Porter may be treating students differently based on their race. That's discrimination, and it's against the law." Zoe nodded slowly. Her mom had talked to her about discrimination before. Dr. Alicia Williams wanted her daughter to understand the world she lived in, even the unfair parts. "I'm going to need to investigate this further," Mrs. Rogers continued. "Would it be okay if I call your mom?" "Yes," Zoe said. "She works at the hospital, but she always answers her phone if the school calls." Mrs. Rogers picked up her phone and dialed the number from Zoe's file. After a brief conversation explaining what had happened, she handed the phone to Zoe. "Baby, are you okay?" Dr. Williams asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine, Mom," Zoe assured her. "I didn't eat the bad food. Mrs. Rogers gave me a sandwich instead." "Good. I'm leaving the hospital now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After Zoe handed the phone back, Mrs. Rogers stood up. "I need to speak with Principal Martinez about this right away. You can stay here and finish your lunch, or you can go back to class if you'd prefer." "I'd rather stay here if that's okay," Zoe said. The thought of facing all the stares and whispers in the hallways made her stomach twist. "Of course," Mrs. Rogers said with a gentle smile. "I'll be back soon." When Mrs. Rogers left, Zoe pulled out her phone to text Maya. In AP Rogers' office. "Mom coming to school. We'll tell you everything later." Maya responded almost immediately. "Everyone's talking about what happened. Kelly feels really bad. She didn't know Mrs. Porter was being mean to you." Zoe put her phone away and finished her sandwich. She was surprised to hear about Kelly. They weren't friends, but they weren't enemies either. They just existed in different circles at school. The door to the office opened and Principal Frank Martinez walked in with Mrs. Rogers. Principal Martinez was a tall man with kind eyes and a serious face. He pulled up a chair and sat across from Zoe. "Zoe, Mrs. Rogers has told me what happened in the cafeteria today," he said, his voice deep and calm. "First, I want to apologize that this happened at our school. No student should ever be given unsafe food, and no student should be treated differently because of who they are." Zoe nodded, feeling a little better knowing that the principal was taking this seriously. "We're going to look into this thoroughly," he continued. "We have security cameras in the cafeteria that will show us exactly what happened today. Mrs. Rogers is also going to talk to other students to see if they've had similar experiences." "What's going to happen to Mrs. Porter?" Zoe asked. "Principal?" Martinez exchanged a look with Mrs. Rogers before answering. "For now, she'll be removed from serving food while we investigate. If we find evidence that she's been treating students differently based on their race, there will be serious consequences." The office door opened again, and Zoe's mom rushed in. Dr. Alicia Williams was still wearing her doctor's coat over her blue hospital scrubs. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun similar to Zoe's box braids. "Zoe," she said, immediately going to her daughter and giving her a hug. Then she turned to the school administrators. "I want to know exactly what happened and what you're doing about it." For the next 20 minutes, Principal Martinez and Mrs. Rogers explained the situation. They showed Dr. Williams the notes Mrs. Rogers had taken during her talk with Zoe. "This is completely unacceptable," Dr. Williams said, her voice firm but controlled. "My daughter could have gotten sick from eating moldy food." "We agree completely," Principal Martinez said. "Food safety is our top priority, along with ensuring all students are treated equally." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "Has anyone checked if other students got sick? If the macaroni and cheese was spoiled, Mrs. Porter might have served it to other children before Zoe noticed the mold." The room went silent. It was clear no one had thought of this. Principal Martinez quickly picked up the phone and called the school nurse. After a brief conversation, his face grew more serious. "Nurse Betty says 3 students have come in complaining of stomach cramps after lunch," he reported. "She didn't connect it to the food until now." Dr. Williams stood up. "I need to examine those children. As a doctor, I can help determine if this is food poisoning." "Of course," Principal Martinez agreed. "Mrs. Rogers, please escort Dr. Williams to the nurse's office. I'm going to call the district superintendent and the health department. We need to close the cafeteria immediately." As her mom left with Mrs. Rogers, Zoe sat alone in the office again. She felt a mix of emotions. Worry for the sick students, anger at Mrs. Porter, but also a sense of relief that adults were taking action. A few minutes later, Mrs. Rogers returned. "Your mom is helping the nurse with the sick students," she explained. "She asked if you could wait here a little longer." "That's fine," Zoe said. "Is it okay if I work on my homework?" "Of course," Mrs. Rogers replied. "But first I need to ask you a favor. Would you be willing to help me identify other students who might have been treated unfairly by Mrs. Porter?" Zoe thought about it. "I can try. I know Jamal Carter has mentioned stuff to me before." Mrs. Rogers nodded and wrote down Jamal's name. "Anyone else?" "Maybe Maria Gonzalez and her brother Luis?" And Deshaun Washington said something once about Mrs. Porter always questioning if he was really allowed to have the free lunch program. Mrs. Rogers wrote down all the names. "This is very helpful, Zoe. Thank you for speaking up. It takes courage to do what you did today." Zoe shrugged. "My mom always says we have to stand up when things aren't right, even when it's hard." "Your mom sounds very wise." Mrs. Rogers smiled. "I'm going to go talk to these students now." Principal Martinez asked me to tell you that he's in the security office reviewing the camera footage from the cafeteria. After Mrs. Rogers left, Zoe pulled out her math textbook and tried to focus on her homework. But her mind kept going back to the lunch line and Mrs. Porter's face when she'd asked for fresh food. There had been something in the lunch lady's eyes, not just annoyance but something deeper and colder. The office door opened again and Principal Martinez walked in. His expression was grim. "Zoe, I've just watched the security footage," he said, sitting down across from her. "It clearly shows Mrs. Porter examining the food before giving it to you. She knew it wasn't right." Zoe felt her heart beat faster. She'd known Mrs. Porter didn't like her, but to deliberately give her spoiled food, that was worse than she'd imagined. The footage also shows her immediately replacing Kelly Adams' food when she complained about the same issue. Principal Martinez continued. "There's no question that you were treated differently." "What happens now?" Zoe asked. "The superintendent is on his way here. The health department has been notified and they're sending inspectors. Mrs. Porter has been asked to remain in the teacher's lounge until we can talk to her." He paused. "Zoe, I want you to know that what you did today was very important. You may have prevented other students from getting sick." Outside the office window, Zoe could see news vans pulling into the school parking lot. Word had gotten out, and now the whole town would know what had happened at Lincoln Middle School. Zoe wasn't sure how she felt about that. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Are you okay?" "People are saying reporters are at the school." Before Zoe could reply, her mom returned to the office with Mrs. Rogers. "The students are going to be fine," Dr. Williams reported. "Mild food poisoning. I've called their parents and recommended clear fluids and rest." She sat next to Zoe and put an arm around her shoulders. "The real story is just beginning," she said, looking at the news vans through the window. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Zoe looked up at her mother, then at Principal Martinez and Mrs. Rogers. All three adults were waiting for her answer. In that moment, Zoe realized that sometimes standing up for what's right meant you couldn't just walk away after. Sometimes you had to see it through to the end. "I'm ready," she said, sitting up straighter in her chair. The superintendent's car pulled into the school parking lot, just as the first news crew was setting up their camera. Harold Brown had been in charge of the school district for 8 years, and he had never faced a situation quite like this. He straightened his tie and walked briskly into the building, nodding politely but saying nothing to the reporter who called out to him. Inside Principal Martinez's office, the mood was tense. Zoe and her mother sat on one side of the large desk. Principal Martinez and Mrs. Rogers sat on the other side. They all looked up when Superintendent Brown entered. "Dr. Williams," he said, shaking Zoe's mother's hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." He turned to Zoe with a kind smile. "And you must be Zoe. Thank you for being brave enough to report what happened today." Zoe nodded, feeling slightly overwhelmed by all the attention. She had just wanted to get a proper lunch, not start what felt like a school-wide crisis. "I've been briefed on the situation," Superintendent Brown said, taking a seat. "The health inspectors are on their way, and I've asked for Mrs. Porter to join us shortly. But first, I'd like to hear directly from Zoe what happened." For the third time that day, Zoe explained how Mrs. Porter had given her moldy macaroni and cheese, refused to replace it, and then immediately replaced Kelly Adams's food when she made the same complaint. And this wasn't the first time Mrs. Porter treated you differently? Superintendent Brown asked. No, sir, Zoe replied. It's been happening all year. To me and to other students who look like me. The superintendent's face grew more serious. Principal Martinez, you mentioned you have video evidence? Principal Martinez nodded and turned his computer monitor so everyone could see. He played the security footage from the cafeteria. The black and white video clearly showed Mrs. Porter serving Zoe, Zoe pointing to something on her tray, and Mrs. Porter dismissing her. Then it showed Kelly approaching the line minutes later making a similar complaint and Mrs. Porter immediately replacing her food. This is disturbing, Superintendent Brown said. Mrs. Rogers, you've spoken with other students? Yes, Mrs. Rogers replied, opening her notebook. I've interviewed Jamal Carter, Maria and Luis Gonzalez, and Deshaun Washington. All of them described similar experiences with Mrs. Porter. Smaller portions, questioning their free lunch status, refusing special requests that were granted to white students. Dr. Williams spoke up. This is clear racial discrimination. My daughter and other children of color have been targeted by this woman, and today it escalated to a point where students got sick. I agree, Superintendent Brown said, and I assure you we're taking this very seriously. The health department violation alone is grounds for immediate termination, but the discrimination makes this even more severe. There was a knock at the ER daughter, and the school secretary poked her head in. The health inspectors are here, she announced, and the local news is asking for a statement. Tell the inspectors I'll be right with them, Principal Martinez said, and no statements to the press yet. Superintendent Brown stood up. I think it's time we speak with Mrs. Porter. Dr. Williams, would you prefer if Zoe waited elsewhere during this conversation? Dr. Williams looked at her daughter. What do you think, Zoe? You don't have to be here for this part if you don't want to be. Zoe thought for a moment. She was tired and a little scared about facing Mrs. Porter, but she also felt she deserved to hear what the lunch lady had to say. I want to stay, she decided. Principal Martinez nodded and asked his secretary to bring Mrs. Porter to the office. A few minutes later, Gladys Porter walked in. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. She glanced around the room, her eyes widening when she saw Zoe and her mother. Mrs. Porter, please have a seat, Superintendent Brown said, his voice firm but not unkind. We need to discuss what happened in the cafeteria today. Mrs. Porter sat down stiffly. It was a simple mistake, she said, before anyone could ask a question. I didn't realize the food was spoiled. We were very busy and I simply didn't notice. We've reviewed the security footage, Mrs. Porter, Principal Martinez said. It shows you examining Zoe's food before serving it to her. When she pointed out the problem, you refused to replace it. Then, minutes later, you immediately replaced the same food when Kelly Adams complained. Mrs. Porter's face flushed. That's not... I didn't... We've also spoken with several other students, Mrs. Rogers added. They've reported a pattern of you treating students of color differently than white students, smaller portions, questioning their meal program eligibility, refusing special requests. That's not true, Mrs. Porter said, her voice rising. I treat all students the same. These children are making up stories. Superintendent Brown leaned forward. Mrs. Porter, the evidence suggests otherwise. 3 students are now sick from food served in your cafeteria. The health department is currently inspecting your kitchen. This is an extremely serious situation. Mrs. Porter's defiance seemed to crumble. She looked down at her hands. I've worked here for 15 years. I've never had a complaint before. Dr. Williams spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Perhaps because students were afraid to complain. My daughter was brave enough to speak up, but how many others suffered in silence? The door opened again and a woman in a health department uniform entered. Excuse me, she said. I need to speak with the administration immediately. Principal Martinez, Mrs. Rogers, and Superintendent Brown stepped outside with the health inspector. Zoe, her mother, and Mrs. Porter sat in awkward silence. Mrs. Porter kept her eyes down, refusing to look at Zoe or Dr. Williams. After a few minutes, the administrators returned. Their faces were grim. "Mrs. Porter," Superintendent Brown said, "the health inspectors have found numerous violations in your kitchen. Expired food being served, improper temperature control, and unsanitary conditions." Mrs. Porter's face went pale. "That's not possible. I run a clean kitchen." "The evidence says otherwise," Principal Martinez replied. "Mrs. Porter, in light of these findings and the video evidence of discrimination, you are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination proceedings." Mrs. Porter gasped. "You can't do that. I have rights." "Yes, you do," Superintendent Brown said. "And you'll have the opportunity to present your side during the formal hearing. But for now, you are not to return to the cafeteria or contact any students or parents." Mrs. Porter stood up, her face contorted with anger. She pointed at Zoe. "This is all because of you. You couldn't just eat what you were given like everyone else." Dr. Williams rose to her feet, positioning herself slightly in front of her daughter. "Mrs. Porter, my daughter did exactly what she should have done when served unsafe food. The fact that you're blaming her instead of accepting responsibility speaks volumes." A security guard appeared at the door. "Mrs. Porter, I'll escort you to collect your personal belongings," he said quietly. As Mrs. Porter left with the guard, she gave one last angry look at Zoe. The door closed behind her, and the room fell, silent. Zoe felt a strange mix of emotions. She was glad Mrs. Porter was being held accountable, but the lunch lady's anger had scared her a little. Would Mrs. Porter try to get back at her somehow? "You okay, baby?" Dr. Williams asked, noticing her daughter's worried expression. "Yeah," Zoe said. "Just thinking." Superintendent Brown sat down again. "Zoe, I want to assure you that Mrs. Porter will not be allowed back in this school. You're safe here." Zoe nodded, feeling a little better. "Now," Superintendent Brown continued, "we need to address the media. There are 3 news crews outside, and I'm sure there will be more soon." "Do we have to talk to them?" Zoe asked anxiously. "Not if you don't want to," Principal Martinez assured her. "We can handle the press without you." Dr. Williams put her arm around Zoe's shoulders. "It's your choice, Zoe. But sometimes sharing your story can help make sure this doesn't happen to other kids." Zoe thought about Jamal, Maria, Luis, and Deshawn. She thought about all the other kids who might be treated unfairly because of how they looked. "I'll talk to them," she decided. "But can my mom be with me?" "Of course," Superintendent Brown said. "We'll make a brief statement together. No interviews today, you've been through enough." As they prepared to face the cameras, Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "The whole school knows what happened. Everyone's on your side. You're a hero." Zoe didn't feel like a hero. She had just wanted to be treated fairly. But as she walked, with her mother and the school officials toward the front entrance where the reporters waited, she began to understand that sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for others too. Outside, camera flashes greeted them. Superintendent Brown stepped to the microphones first, explaining the situation in general terms without naming any students. Then, to Zoe's surprise, he invited her and her mother to say a few words if they wished. Dr. Williams spoke briefly about the importance of equal treatment for all children. Then she looked down at Zoe with an encouraging smile. Zoe took a deep breath and stepped forward. The cameras focused on her, and for a moment, she forgot what she wanted to say. Then she remembered her mother's words. "We have to stand up when things aren't right, even when it's hard." "My name is Zoe Williams," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I just want everyone to be treated fairly." By the next morning, Zoe's story was all over the local news. The headline in the town newspaper read, "School lunch lady suspended after giving moldy food to student of color." The online version had already been shared thousands of times. Zoe sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, watching her mom scroll through the news on her tablet. Dr. Williams had taken the day off from the hospital to be with her daughter. "Do I have to go to school today?" Zoe asked, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. Dr. Williams looked up. "Do you want to stay home?" I'd understand if you need a day off after everything that happened. Zoe thought about it. Part of her wanted to hide at home and avoid all the attention, but another part of her felt it was important to go back and face everyone. I'll go, she decided, but can you drive me? I don't want to take the bus today. Of course, her mom said with a proud smile. I'll pick you up after school too. When they arrived at Lincoln Middle School, Zoe was surprised to see a small group of parents and students standing near the entrance holding signs. As they got closer, Zoe could read what the sign said: equal treatment for all students, and food safety matters and Lincoln Middle School stands against discrimination. Maya broke away from the group and ran to Zoe's car. Zoe, we're here to support you. Zoe got out of the car, feeling both embarrassed and touched by the show of support. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Yes, we did, said a voice behind Maya. It was Kelly Adams, the blonde girl from the lunch line. I'm really sorry about what happened yesterday. I had no idea Mrs. Porter was treating you differently. It's not your fault, Zoe said. Principal Martinez appeared at the school entrance. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your support, but let's make sure we don't disrupt the school day. Students, please head to your classes. As the crowd began to disperse, Principal Martinez approached Zoe and her mother. Dr. Williams, Zoe, could you join me in my office? There have been some developments we should discuss. In the principal's office, Superintendent Brown was waiting with Mrs. Rogers and a man Zoe didn't recognize. He wore a suit and carried a briefcase. Zoe, Dr. Williams, this is Mr. Alan Patterson from the school board, Principal Martinez said. Mr. Patterson stood and shook hands with Dr. Williams. I've been assigned to oversee the investigation into yesterday's incident, he explained. Investigation? Dr. Williams repeated. I thought the evidence was quite clear. It is, Superintendent Brown assured her. Mrs. Porter's actions were caught on video, and the health violations were documented by county inspectors. However, the school board wants to ensure everything is handled properly before formal termination. Mr. Patterson nodded. We've interviewed Mrs. Porter this morning. She's claiming that she didn't see the mold on the food and that there's no pattern of discrimination. Dr. Williams frowned. Even with the video evidence? She says it doesn't show the whole story, Mr. Patterson replied. However, I've reviewed all the evidence myself and I find her explanations unconvincing. What happens now? Zoe asked. The school board will meet tomorrow evening to make a final decision, Mr. Patterson explained. In the meantime, the cafeteria remains closed. We've arranged for sandwich deliveries for all students today. And what about the other students who reported similar experiences? Dr. Williams asked. Has anyone talked to them again? Mrs. Rogers spoke up. Yes, I've conducted formal interviews with Jamal Carter, the Gonzalez siblings, and Deshaun Washington. They've all provided detailed accounts of their experiences with Mrs. Porter. There's something else you should know, Superintendent Brown added. After the news broke last night, we received calls from several former students and parents. Apparently, this behavior has been going on for years. Zoe felt a chill run down her spine. For years? Why didn't anyone say anything before? Some did, Principal Martinez said sadly. But the complaints were never properly documented or investigated. I've only been principal here for 2 years, and this is the first I'm hearing of it. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. This raises serious concerns about the school's past leadership and reporting procedures. The board will be looking into that as well. A knock on the door interrupted them. The school secretary poked her head in. Excuse me, but there's a woman here from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education. She says she needs to speak with the administration. Superintendent Brown looked surprised. Already? The federal government moves quickly these days. The power of social media, Mr. Patterson said. Your story went viral overnight, Zoe. Zoe hadn't realized how big this had become. What started as a simple request for fresh food had turned into a federal investigation. Zoe, Principal Martinez, said gently, this is going to get more complicated before it gets better. There will be more interviews, more questions. Are you prepared for that? Zoe looked at her mom, who gave her an encouraging nod. I think so, she said. I just told the truth. And that's all you need to keep doing, Dr. Williams assured her. Can I go to class now? Zoe asked. I have a math test today. The adults exchanged glances, seeming surprised by her focus on something so normal amid all the chaos. Of course, Principal Martinez said. Mrs. Rogers, would you please walk Zoe to her classroom? As Zoe left with Mrs. Rogers, she heard Superintendent Brown tell her mother, Your daughter is remarkable, Dr. Williams. Yes, her mom replied proudly. She is. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of whispers and stares. Some students wanted to hear the whole story directly from Zoe. Others just gave her supportive smiles or thumbs up in the hallway. By lunchtime, Zoe was exhausted from all the attention. She joined Maya in the gym, where tables had been set up for lunch since the cafeteria was closed. Volunteers handed out sandwiches, fruit, and drinks to the students. How are you holding up? Maya asked as they found seats. Okay, I guess, Zoe replied. It's weird being the center of attention. Well, you're famous now, Maya said. Did you see you're trending on social media? Justice for Zoe is everywhere. Zoe almost choked on her sandwich. What? No way. Maya showed her phone to Zoe. Sure enough, there were thousands of posts with the hashtag Justice for Zoe. People from all over the country were sharing her story and demanding action. This is too much, Zoe mumbled, feeling overwhelmed. Hey, look who's here, Maya said, nodding toward the gym entrance. Jamal Carter, a tall 7th grader and one of the few other black students in their grade, was walking toward them. Behind him were Maria and Luis Gonzalez and Deshaun Washington, Mendreich. If we join you? Jamal asked. Sure, Zoe said, making room at their table. We all gave statements about Mrs. Porter, Jamal said as they sat down. Thanks for speaking up, Zoe. None of us had the courage to do it. I wasn't trying to be brave, Zoe admitted. I just didn't want to eat moldy food. Well, you did what none of us did, Maria said, and now maybe things will change around here. As they ate, more students came over to express their support. Even some teachers stopped by to tell Zoe they were proud of her. The whole school seemed united in a way Zoe had never seen before. After school, Zoe's mom was waiting in the parking lot as promised. As they drove home, Dr. Williams told Zoe that the school board had moved up their meeting to that evening because of the federal investigation. They've asked if we would attend, she said. You don't have to if you don't want to. Will Mrs. Porter be there? Zoe asked. Yes, with her union representative. Zoe thought for a moment. I'll go. I want to hear what she has to say. That evening, Zoe and her mother arrived at the school district offices. The parking lot was full, and a crowd had gathered outside the building. Some people held signs similar to those Zoe had seen that morning. Inside, the meeting room was packed. School board members sat at a long table at the front. Principal Martinez, Superintendent Brown, and Mrs. Rogers were seated to one side. Mrs. Porter and an older man Zoe didn't know sat on the other side. When Zoe and her mother entered, a hush fell over the room. Mr. Patterson, the school board representative who had been at the school that morning, stood up and offered them seats near the front. As the meeting began, Zoe watched Mrs. Porter carefully. The lunch lady kept her eyes down, never looking at Zoe or her mother. She looked smaller somehow, less scary than she had seemed in the cafeteria. The school board president, a stern-looking woman with silver hair, called the meeting to order. Due to the serious nature of the allegations in the federal investigation that has begun, we have convened this emergency session to address the employment status of Mrs. Gladys Porter, she announced. For the next hour, Zoe listened as both sides presented their case. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The video, the health violations, the testimonies from multiple students. When it was Mrs. Porter's turn to speak, she claimed again that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had never meant to discriminate against anyone. I've served this district faithfully for 15 years, she said, her voice shaking. I would never intentionally harm a child. Then, unexpectedly, she turned to look directly at Zoe. I'm sorry if you felt I treated you unfairly, she said. That was never my intention. It wasn't a real apology, Zoe realized. Mrs. Porter was sorry that Zoe felt treated unfairly, not sorry for actually treating her unfairly. There was a big difference. Finally, the board members voted. The decision was unanimous. 3 weeks had passed since the incident in the cafeteria. Spring had fully arrived in town, and the trees around Lincoln Middle School were covered in fresh green leaves. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the newly reopened cafeteria as Zoe entered with Maya. The space looked different now. The walls had been repainted in bright colors and new posters about food safety and cultural diversity hung everywhere. But the biggest change was behind the lunch counter, where a tall man with a friendly smile greeted the students. "Good morning, Zoe." "Good morning, Maya," he called out. "We've got fresh baked lasagna today, and I made sure to bring extra garlic bread because I know it's your favorite." "Thanks, Mr. Washington," Zoe replied with a smile. Greg Washington was the new cafeteria manager. He had been hired 2 weeks ago after a thorough search by the school district. Unlike Mrs. Porter, who had no formal training in food service, Mr. Washington had owned a small restaurant before deciding he wanted to work with kids. He made it his mission to learn every student's name and their favorite foods. Zoe and Maya got their trays and found seats at their usual table. Jamal, Deshawn, and the Gonzalez siblings joined them a few minutes later. "Did you guys hear about the new diversity committee?" Maria asked as she sat down. "Mrs. Rogers just told me they want student representatives from each grade." "Are you going to join?" Maya asked, looking at Zoe. Zoe shrugged. "I don't know. I'm not sure I want to be more involved in school stuff right now." Since the incident, Zoe had become something of a celebrity at Lincoln Middle School. Students she had never spoken to before now greeted her in the hallways. Teachers used her story in class discussions about standing up for what's right. The local newspaper had done a feature on her family, focusing on her mother's work as a doctor and their community involvement. It was all a bit much for Zoe, who had never wanted to be in the spotlight. She just wanted things to go back to normal, but she was starting to realize that normal had changed. "I think you should join," Jamal said. "You started all this change. You should help make sure it keeps going in the right direction." Before Zoe could respond, Principal Martinez approached their table. "Good morning, students," he said. "Zoe, could I speak with you for a moment?" Zoe followed the principal to a quiet corner of the cafeteria. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything is fine," Principal Martinez assured her. "I wanted to let you know that Superintendent Brown and some people from the school board will be visiting today. They're checking on how our new initiatives are going, and they asked if you would be willing to speak with them briefly." Zoe hesitated. She was tired of talking about the incident, tired of being the face of change at the school. Principal Martinez seemed to sense her reluctance. "You can say no, Zoe. You've already done more than enough. But I think they would really value hearing your thoughts on how things have improved." Zoe thought about Mr. Washington and his efforts to make every student feel welcome in the cafeteria. She thought about the diversity committee Maria had mentioned. Real changes were happening because she had spoken up. "Okay," she agreed. "I'll talk to them." "Thank you," Principal Martinez said. "They'll be here during 5th period. I'll send someone to get you from class." When Zoe returned to her table, her friends were curious about what the principal had wanted. She explained about the visit from the superintendent and the school board. "They're probably going to give you an award or something," Deshawn said. Zoe laughed. "I hope not. I just want everything to settle down." After lunch, Zoe went to her classes as usual. In social studies, they were discussing civil rights movements throughout history. Mr. Baker, the teacher, had adjusted his lesson plan to include examples of how small acts of courage often led to big changes. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for others too," he said, echoing the words Zoe had thought to herself weeks ago. During 5th period math class, a student aide came to get Zoe. She followed him to the conference room near the principal's office, where Superintendent Brown, Mr. Patterson from the school board, and several other adults were waiting. "Ah, here she is," Superintendent Brown said warmly. "Zoe, thank you for joining us." Zoe nodded politely and took the empty seat they had saved for her. She recognized most of the people there, but there was one woman she hadn't met before. "Zoe, this is Dr. Angela Freeman from the State Education Department," Superintendent Brown explained. "She's helping us implement our new diversity and inclusion program across the district." Dr. Freeman smiled at Zoe. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Zoe. Your courage has inspired changes that will benefit thousands of students." Zoe wasn't sure how to respond to such a big statement. "I was just trying to get lunch," she said honestly. The adults laughed, but not in a mean way. "Sometimes the most important changes start with the simplest actions," Dr. Freeman said. For the next 20 minutes, the adults asked Zoe questions about how things had changed at school since the incident. Had she noticed any improvements? Did she feel the new cafeteria staff treated all students equally? Was there anything else that could be done better? Zoe answered as honestly as she could. Yes, things were better in the cafeteria. Mr. Washington was kind to everyone. But there were still problems in other areas. Some teachers still called on white students more often than students of color. Some kids still made comments that hurt, even if they didn't mean to be hurtful. The adults listened carefully, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. They seemed genuinely interested in her perspective. "Zoe, we've developed a new training program for all staff in the district," Dr. Freeman explained when Zoe had finished. "Your experience has helped us identify blind spots in our system. We're also creating a new reporting process so students can safely report any concerns about unfair treatment." "That's good," Zoe said. "A lot of kids were afraid to speak up before." "Exactly," Superintendent Brown agreed. "And that's why we'd like to name the new program after you, the Zoe Williams Equity Initiative." Zoe's eyes widened. "What? No, I don't want that," she said quickly. "Please don't put my name on anything." The adults looked surprised by her reaction. "I just want to be a regular kid," Zoe explained. "I don't want to be the face of this forever. Other kids have stories too, it's not just about me." There was a moment of silence, then Dr. Freeman nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, Zoe. This isn't about one person. It's about creating a system that's fair for everyone. Perhaps we could call it the Student Equity Initiative instead," Mr. Patterson suggested, "and include stories from multiple students in our training materials with their permission, of course." "I like that better," Zoe said, relieved they understood. After the meeting, Zoe returned to her math class. The teacher didn't ask why she had been called out, just handed her the worksheet the other students were working on. It felt good to focus on something normal like math problems. At the end of the day, Zoe found a note in her locker asking her to stop by Mrs. Rogers' office. The assistant principal was waiting with a kind smile. "Principal Martinez told me about your meeting with the superintendent," she said. "I'm proud of you for speaking your mind, especially about not wanting the program named after you." Zoe shrugged. "I just want things to get better for everyone." "That's what makes you special, Zoe," Mrs. Rogers said. "But I didn't call you here to talk about that. I wanted to ask if you'd consider being on our Student Diversity Committee. We need voices like yours." "Jamal said I should do it too," Zoe admitted. "But I don't know if I'm the right person. I'm not a leader." Mrs. Rogers leaned forward. "Zoe, leadership isn't about being the loudest or the most outgoing. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. You've already shown you can do that." Zoe thought about it. Maybe being on the committee would help make sure the changes at school lasted. Maybe it would help other kids feel brave enough to speak up too. "Okay," she decided. "I'll join the committee." Mrs. Rogers smiled. "Wonderful. Our first meeting is Thursday after school." When Zoe walked out of the building, her mom was waiting in the car as usual. Since the incident, Dr. Williams had adjusted her hospital schedule to drive Zoe to and from school every day. "How was your day?" Dr. Williams asked as Zoe got in. "Pretty good," Zoe replied. "I'm going to join the Student Diversity Committee." Her mom looked pleased. "That's wonderful, Zoe. I think you'll have a lot to contribute." As they drove home, Zoe looked out the window at her school growing smaller in the distance. So much had changed in just 3 weeks. A lunch lady who had treated students unfairly was gone. New policies were being created. People were paying attention to problems they had ignored before, all because she had spoken up about moldy macaroni and cheese. "Mom," Zoe said suddenly, "do you believe in karma?" Dr. Williams glanced at her daughter. "The idea that what goes around comes around? That how you treat others will come back to you?" "Yes, in many ways I do." Zoe nodded. "Mrs. Porter gave me moldy food because of how I look, and minutes later everything started falling apart for her. That's karma, right?" "I suppose it is," her mom agreed. "But karma isn't just about bad things happening to people who do wrong. It's also about good things coming from good actions. You stood up for yourself and others, and now positive changes are happening. That's karma too." Zoe smiled as she thought,